These Shell dialogues are a series of global debates aimed at providing policy options on critical energy issues.
Good evening and the warmest welcome to the Shell Energy Dialogues. We're coming to you from, I think, the most interesting and auspicious of venues in the entire series, the Ushaga Marine World in Durban, South Africa. Now, you know, climate change has become a very fashionable term, and pursuing the green agenda has become a fashionable cause as well. Many people use terminology such as global warming and the need to reduce greenhouse gases. And in normal parlance, this sounds like very abstract terms, but when you're dealing with the situation in Africa, climate change is a very real issue. Increasingly, weather conditions have become erratic on the African continent. Rivers are filling up and the soil seems to be getting drier. Experts say that Africa, of all the continents, is the most susceptible, the most vulnerable, and the most affected by climate change. The challenge now is for us to raise awareness about what it is and how dire the situation is. The case for South Africa seems to be even more urgent. Not only is this the largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, it's also the economy that's seen with driving the broad agenda for industrial growth within the region. 90% of our energy comes from coal-based energy, and so meeting the climate change agenda becomes very challenging for South Africa and for the region, because it means dismantling the inherent infrastructure of coal-based electricity supply. We're joined by an auspicious team of experts here to discuss whether or not South Africa's climate change targets and pursuit of renewable energies is overly ambitious, or whether or not it's feasible. I'd like to introduce to you Tasneem Essop, who's with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, South Africa. Thanks very much for coming through. Next to her is Steve Thorne, who's with South North Africa. Thank you very much. Thembani Bukula is with NERSA, effectively the regulator. Thank you very much for coming through. And finally, environmental lawyer Glendry Nel, who's with Cullian Associates. Thank you, Glenda, for being with us. Tasneem, let's start with you. South Africa has set itself a target of reducing its carbon footprint by about 34% within the next decade. Is that feasible?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that these are not targets as one would expect from developed countries in terms of the international treaty, the Kyoto Protocol. In fact, South Africa's commitments are voluntary. And they made this commitment in Copenhagen as a voluntary commitment, but also conditional commitment. And that's really important to understand. And it really is conditional on two things. One, that there is an agreement reached, a multilateral agreement reached under the UN on climate change, and the kind of support from developed countries that could allow us to meet those very ambitious targets, according to the government. Right. So those are the conditions. My own opinion, I believe it's feasible. I believe it's doable. I think it's going to be extremely challenging to meet those targets by 2020 and 2025. But it's been done on work done by government, the long-term mitigation scenarios. So I think it's feasible, ambitious, it's challenging, but it's seriously doable.
Stephen Thorne, your views on this one. Is South Africa setting itself surmountable challenges?
I think these targets can be achieved. Well, targets, they're not really targets, it's a voluntary commitment, as Tasneem said. You just have to unpack, it's 34% below a 2020 level of business as usual. So it's continuing to emit at the same rate as we do at the present. So 34%, if we grow at 3%, which is a low end, means we stay stable in terms of our emissions. We haven't even started touching our efficiency opportunities or renewable energy opportunities. And if we do that and we change behavior, and with the help of the regulator bring down some of the institutional barriers, we can do it.
Thembani, your views on this one, because what we've seen is the government speak about pursuing a green agenda, and then we see massive investments into new coal-based power stations under the auspices of Eskom.
Let me start by saying that the 34% is achievable, but I think we also have to accept that it is not just going to be achievable without costing. If we are going to achieve the 34%, the first thing it's going to cost us. The price of electricity will rise from the 41 cents that it is to around 172 per kilowatt hour. The second part that we've got to accept is that to get the renewable energies to be at the level where we can achieve the other goals that as government we want to have, we need an integrated resources plan, which includes coal, by the way. Does not exclude coal. You cannot have your renewables being industrialized without having coal as a major part of your generation mix.
Glenda, your views on this one. Not only do we have targets of reducing our carbon footprint, but we've got broader socio-economic development challenges in this country.
Yes, I think the first thing I actually wanted to add to was the fact that the target, the 34% reduction, actually takes into account the new coal-powered power, the Medupi and Kusile. So in other words, what it's saying to us is that we can't just say we're not going to achieve that because we've already committed to coal. That's been factored in. So what we have to do is we have to find out what else. We have to work out what is the most cost-effective way of reaching that target, understanding that coal's already factored in. And yes, when you talk about social and economic, it is, we've got to look at it from what is the most cost-effective way.
Thanks for that input. Steve, I want to get your views on this one. We are effectively a developmental state. We have unveiled an industrial growth strategy. We have to be growing at the very least at 6% per annum in order to create the kinds of jobs that will be meaningful to this economy. We can't do all of that if we're only going to follow a renewable energy path.
I agree. We've got to do efficiency first. We've got to look at where we can use gas appropriately, and gas from plants like Secunda, which has got 22 flares going all the time, a gigawatt of power waiting to be used. If we start harnessing and start doing things more efficiently, we certainly can reach those goals. But the real point is that we can't be expected to make this leapfrog into clean energy with the world watching us unless there's some support from outside. And there are climate investment funds being realized at an international level to assist with covering the incremental cost, or the cost between what we would normally do and what the clean options are. And those should help considerably.
Tasneem, can we grow and be clean?
I think that it's very possible. There are examples across the globe of instances where another path has been chosen and you improve the quality of life of people. Look, the point about doing this is really, not to see growth and the 6% target as the only way you can achieve job creation and poverty alleviation. I mean, we've been talking for years about sustainable development as an approach to economic development, and we've not really implemented the kinds of policies that get us there. So I would argue that even if you do get 6% growth, we have had experiences of what is called jobless growth, for instance. We do see that even with that 6% target or 3 to 4% target, you get the trickle-down effect. And essentially, we're not having to reduce our carbon footprint because it is something that the world wants us to do. We know that the impacts are going to be felt by the poor. So our big challenge is to address poverty, and the way you do that is to address what's making them more vulnerable, the poor more vulnerable into the future.
Glenda, earlier on I just released a statistic that said about 90% of electricity is generated from coal-based power. The other 10% is now looking at alternatives, nuclear and the rest of it. If we address these very fundamental socio-economic issues under the current situation, can we really realistically be talking about a cleaner option for South Africa?
I think the point is we have to. I think that for anything to be sustainable, including businesses, including anything, we have to change. We have to start redirecting ourselves. We have to, if the bus is going in the wrong direction, we have to get off. It doesn't help to stay on any longer. And I think that's the point. We have to. And there are ways. There are, for instance, and I know that there have been quite a lot of studies about carbon taxes and using it actually to feed back to the poor. In other words, I know it might be difficult in practical terms to do, but we can certainly put our heads around it, where you do the carbon tax and then you feed back to the people who need it the most would get more than the people who are using more.
Thembani, let's get your views on this one. We know that heavy industry is the backbone of this economy, mining, for instance. And we know that there have been attempts at looking at some of the larger South African companies and getting into cogeneration agreements with them, for instance, as a way of getting industry to be a little bit more responsible. But what more can be done? There's talk of an environmental tax potentially on big business, but what needs to be done to conscientize business about the impact that they're having on the environment, but at the same time allowing them to create jobs through massive industrialization?
If we look at the growth strategy as it was in the 70s and the 80s, it was based on the energy, and it had, I mean, your GDP, as you're speaking, was whenever you had 6% growth, you would expect an electricity demand growth of around 4%. The truth and the fact of the matter is, going forward, you have to decouple your economic growth from your electricity demand growth, which means that you are still going to have these energy-intensive users, but now the difference is they've got to be efficient. They've got to use less and still provide the same number of jobs. You have to find other systems that ensure that you do have the growth, but what you do not have is the growth of your electricity directly coupled or linked on a one-to-one basis.
Tasneem, your comments on this one, because some experts argue that it's all good and well to talk about alternative energy sources, renewable energy sources, but in order to set up the infrastructure for the renewables, you would need to create industries of scale, of solar power, of wind power, etc. And the input costs are too heavy. So actually, to be realistic, we are stuck with coal-based power for the foreseeable future.
Look, there have been studies, of course, the implications of introducing any new technology into an existing system, into an existing grid system and infrastructure setup. It's going to be costly. But over the long term, those costs come down and in fact become very competitive. Renewable energy, in a study that we've done, over the long term, is far more affordable and cost effective than any other of the options available to us. And so with the increasing price of coal as well, and of course it becoming resource constraint in the future, it will be. I do want to make one point though, Lerato. I think that businesses in South Africa need to understand, and it's not an environmental issue, it's a fundamental economic issue, that their competitiveness into the future will be judged by their carbon footprint. And so, for example, there are going to be measures put in place globally that will penalize carbon-intensive goods and services. Right. And I think you have to start realizing that as businesses now and adjust for that into the future.
Steve, can alternative energies meet the requirements for industry? Because before we talk about businesses and profits and dividends and shareholders, it's about jobs, the livelihoods of South African people that these industries fuel.
Yeah, the need for stable baseload certainly is required. And we've got a lot of energy options in the continent. We haven't really tested some of ours completely. I mean, we've got good wind regime, we've got biomass and waste which could be utilized. A lot of these can give very good baseload for industry, but industry is not the only machine for creating jobs. I mean, demand management and renewables are shown to create far more jobs per unit of energy than centralized energy generation. But I think we should also talk a little bit about the liquid sector at some stage.
It's time for us to take a short break. We are at the Shell Energy Dialogues coming to you from Durban, South Africa. Our focus tonight is climate change. The targets of reducing South Africa's carbon footprint by 34%, is that feasible? That's the fundamental question we'll be answering after the break.